I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, we're sure to find happiness. And I guess all those things you've always pined.
The term derives from the baseball term, a screwball pitch, which is a pitch with an erratic trajectory to confuse the batter. And from that, it worked its way into the lexicon of slang, screwy, and you've got a screw loose from there. It was used to describe the eccentric and unpredictable characters that in the films that became the screwball genre.
Okay, so and then how would you explain sort of the rise of the screwball comedy?
Well, the screwball comedy, if you recall, is not a traditional love story. It's just the opposite. It's a satire, and it satirizes courtship, marriage, traditional institutions, and the wealthy. And it does involve, the center of the action is a couple, usually mismatched and usually from different social classes. And there is sexually charged antagonism that substitutes for a sexual relationship due to the censorship rules. And the dialogue is very fast and witty, and it's not sentimental. So that's the core, and so you can see from its structure and characterization, it is not a traditional love story. It's not a romantic comedy, but it derives from social, economic, and political factors during the 20s and 30s. There were 5 primary factors: the Depression, the repeal of prohibition. Women were allowed to start participating in society with getting the right to vote and driving, and that led to the relaxation of social mores involving women. And then the advent of sound transformed the movie industry, and then finally the imposition of severe censorship rules on all films that were made, specifically regarding any visual or verbal allusions or depictions of sex.
Interesting. Is it, so Bringing Up Baby is such a slapstick comedy in so many ways. I mean, is that part of the genre necessarily, or is it special to this film? What would you say about that?
In terms of, it is not slapstick in the way that it is also not a romantic comedy. Slapstick is a series of sight gags that are strung together. Think Three Stooges, think the Keystone Cops, and screwball comedy does have slapstick elements in it. You saw it today. This is probably the most extreme example of slapstick elements in with David slipping on the olive or sliding down that steep embankment when they're crossing the stream and they step into the sinkhole. And then, of course, most famously, the ending scene of the movie where Susan is rocking wildly on the ladder.
Yes.
Slapstick comedy has inept use of props as a primary element. It was very popular during the silent era. It doesn't need dialogue. And the construct of screwball comedy is so different than slapstick, but you do see elements of it. Calling this movie slapstick would be akin to calling Casablanca a musical, because Julie Wilson sings as time goes by a few times in it.
That makes sense.
It's not a musical.
Yeah. So, like I mentioned in the intro, Howard Hawks brought in a couple of screenwriters to develop this, Hagar, Wilde, and Dudley Nichols. What do you think is particularly notable about what they came up with?
It is a fantastic script. It is so hilarious, first and foremost. It is just funny, and that's what Depression era audiences needed. They needed the laughs. They needed a respite from the suffering and deprivations they were experiencing. And that script delivers it in spades. But also the screenplay is original, and it's very clever. It's loaded with double entendres and innuendos, which give it a subtlety and a nuance. And again, these writers were very inventive. They wanted to write about what they wanted to write about. They didn't want to be dictated to by the censorship board. However, they did have to comply, so the use of the double entendres and innuendos, especially in the context throughout the movie, it's very funny. I mean, these bone jokes run throughout the whole film. There's just so much to love about this script.
Speaking of, so it's that classic scene with Cary Grant in the negligee, which is just hilarious. But when he says, "I've just gone gay all of a sudden," so did he mean it like that? Like, I mean, how old is that slang?
That speech of the "I just went gay all of a sudden" is the first use by a major movie star in a major movie where you're implying homosexuality with the word gay. Of course, this is an example of the double entendre because it also means happy. So it was a way that he could convey that without triggering a censorship protest because it would be alluding to sex, which was strictly verboten.
So they just kind of got away with it,
Yes.
basically. Just
Yes.
snuck it in under the censors. That's great.
And Cary Grant had contributed that line, which is, it's so funny, and it goes with the cleverness of the script. Also, it supports the screwball element of role reversal. Here is the character of David in this super feminine negligee with feathers around the collar and feathers on each sleeve, while you have the screwball heroine in a very masculine terry cloth robe, and that leads to the other central role reversal of this film, and that is that you've got the hero being pursued by the screwball heroine, and that was just revolutionary.
Right? So the cinematography in these movies, in this one in particular, is a little different than what we're used to in contemporary movies. There's so many of those lengthy, wide shots.
Yes. Isn't it a joy to watch? Because you're not being disrupted. You are in the scene. It's very natural. It's very organic, as though you're in the room as these scenes are being played out with these long shots, very spare use of close-ups. The audience is empowered then to view the scene as they will, and it means the filmmakers must have confidence in the acting, in the dialogue, in the scenery, so that they have to have confidence that the audience will pick up on the important parts of the scene. And today's cinematography with all the quick cuts and super close-ups throughout a film are basically leading the audience by the nose through it. They leave no discretion to the audience, and it's a very different, it's disorienting. It can be very disruptive. You can't dive deep into the story because you're constantly being jostled with the quick cuts. An exception to that is when they're used very artfully and effectively. What comes to mind is Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. In the shower scene, Alfred Hitchcock uses 52 cuts in that very short scene. But how effective is it? You get anxious, you're panicking, you're feeling disoriented, all the things that he wants us to feel. So there's an example of when that it's very effective, but there's almost a promiscuous use of editing and quick cuts and close-ups now that otherwise I don't think serve the films well.
Interesting. So let's talk about the director of this film, Howard Hawks. Now this is the first Howard Hawks film but we have a few in the series. We have His Girl Friday and Ball of Fire, both directed by him as well. So we're looking forward to those. But tell me about Howard Hawks in general.
Well, he is in the pantheon of directors of all time, not just Hollywood's golden era. He is just a titan. And what makes him especially revered is that he was a master of multiple genres. Last week's movie, we talked about Frank Capra, and we talked about his particular aesthetic, celebrating the common man and the innate goodness in people. And these threads these motifs run through almost every film of his, and he has a very distinctive footprint, if you will. Howard Hawks, he made movies in every genre, and they're all masterpieces. He made comedies, adventures, westerns, gangster films, and I mean, they're all just fantastic. So he was able to move from genre to genre beautifully, and that is why he's timeless.
He has some connections to Palm Springs, right? I know Cary Grant does.
Yes, they both do. They have both had deep roots in Palm Springs. Cary Grant lived, his first home was on Palm Canyon, and it is now the home to Copley's Restaurant. And the house remains mostly intact in its original condition, so when you walk into the dining room area, you can walk through the house and really absorb and feel the history of the home. The other home that he's probably most known for is in the movie colony on Avenida Palmas. It has his initials on the gates, and he lived there for decades. Likewise, director Howard Hawks from this film also lived in Palm Springs for decades on Stevens Road in Las Palmas. So,
Oh,
yes.
interesting, I didn't know that. Cary Grant is so perfect in this movie.
Isn't he, though? I mean, he plays, this was so different, as you mentioned in the introduction. This was 180 degrees different than any role he had ever played. He traditionally always played suave and charming and the leading man, the hero, if you will. And here he is, bespectacled and upright, rigid, socially awkward, and struggling the whole time. And he plays it beautifully. He took a big gamble playing this role because he didn't know how the public would respond to him in this awkward,
He's
befuddled.
dorky.
Exactly.
I mean, he's adorably dorky, but it's, yeah, totally.
And it so works.
It
Not only did he master all the dialogue and the characterization of an intellectual, of an academician, and also someone who was so uptight, but he also, because of his background, this film required intense physicality, and he mastered that because of his background as an acrobat and vaudevillian. He was able to do all this work effortlessly, and it just, it shows. I mean, no one else, you can't picture anybody else in this part but
Right.
Cary Grant.
Well, and it's amazing too how perfect Katherine Hepburn is when it was so foreign to her. I mean, but she just nails it. She's like the perfect screwball heroine.
Yes, well, she also was very athletic, and so the physical came quite easily. The persona of this flighty, dizzy, madcap, crazy in love woman was very different for her. She, like Cary Grant, she had never played a role like this, and she took a big gamble because she had always played very serious-minded characters, and she's a very commanding presence on the screen in all of her movies, and here, so different, and she's so effective. She's never been more charming, more effervescent, and adorable. You're rooting for her. You want her to get together with David. You know he needs her. He needs that frivolity in his life because he's so straight-laced. And, she's going to let it loose. And anyone who's been crazy in love knows that feeling of you just can't stop thinking about him. You got to be with him. You'll do anything. And she conveys that so perfectly.
Yeah, and she shows him that there's more to life than just being dignified, right?
Exactly. Forget dignity. But the sad thing is, our loss as audience, it was the one and only role she played like this. And never to return to this type of character.
I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, we're sure to...